will this inquiry end up being? Yes, indeed. We're asking about this because today it was Rishi Sunak's turn in the hot seat. What do you make to this? I think that viewer there sums things up very well. A lot of people are drearily fed up about this now, but one of my panellists pointed out last week that actually that's all well and good, that view, if you're not someone that's lost a loved one. If you perhaps in that camp, this inquiry is perhaps something that they are desperately connected with and concerned by.
Do you think so? I'm not sure about that, actually. And I also question whether or not those are the only victims of lockdown. In my view, there are other victims of lockdown, those whose families were affected by the effects of lockdown, and also the rest of us, the whole country, because we were hit economically. So I think we're all victims. I very much fight back against this idea that the only people who are victims were those who lost people.
But Rishi acknowledged that, didn't he? Because at the start of his thing, he said sorry, not just to those people that had lost loved ones, but also, which I thought was quite interesting, to those people that had suffered as well.
Yes. I think, and that's because he was much more sceptical about lockdown and others. I mean, that viewer who says she's fed up, join the club. I have to sit through this blasted thing day after day and then try and write sketches about it.
Quentin, we don't swear at tea time.
Blasted?
Oh, is that what you said?
Yes.
Oh, I've got dirty ears. I've got dirty ears. I heard a completely different word there, so I take that back myself.
Sister Michelle.
Where are you on this?
She's joined the nunnery.
I know, where are you? I honestly heard a completely different word.
Yeah, so we've got to wash your mind out.
I know. I think that says more about me, perhaps.
It does.
Anyway.
I'll be very polite. I mean, I think it's worth having inquiries on these big matters, but one of the concerns I have is about the timing of it. Is it too soon in the life cycle of this government really to get candid, frank admissions of where things got wrong? Because I think if you're still having this inquiry when it's still within the same cycle of the parliament that was elected that did COVID, you're going to the people are going to be much more defensive. They're not going to be honest. I mean, I would think one of the ways that might be better served is really to get behind trying some of the science behind this and to really look at, where did COVID emerge? How did it spread? And think about some of the more immediate, kind of less politically contentious, more scientific side, because we have some of the best scientists in the world, and there is a lot of political blame to be had, but that's already been processed through the political process, and we can have an inquiry down the line that brings in the big hitters, and hopefully, once they've lost power or whatever, they'll be a bit more honest. And if a point of inquiry is to protect us from making the same mistakes again, wouldn't it make more sense to do it not in the heat of the political fight?
Yes, but I think speed was quite important, and is quite important, because the professed idea of this inquiry is to work out what we do better next time if there's another pandemic, which might happen quite soon. Sweden has already had its inquiry, and the mistake that the Lady Hallett's inquiry has made is been getting too obsessed, first of all, with all the political gossip, and disaster having that man Cummings up first, because he's total poison to anything. But also, it's just got too gripped by those stupid WhatsApp messages. We want to know whether or not lockdown worked. Now, if you look at the death numbers for Sweden and Japan, which didn't really do lockdowns, they're much lower than ours and much lower than other countries that have done. Do you think there was enough, because this is a point that came up in the inquiry today when Sunak was getting questioned, in terms of the cost-benefit analysis that was done on these measures and whether or not they were ever truly considered, the impact, the unintended consequences, perhaps you might say, of that?
Well, I think obviously they were dealing with an unknown, and in the pressure of the moment, one of the big concern they had was about deaths, and that's very difficult, I think, for politicians to have to kind of weigh up the economic consequences and so on. But I mean, in hindsight, it's clear that there were areas where it was a mistake to go so tough. I mean, speaking from my sector, from education, I think that we were too tough in shutting down schools and universities. This was a segment of the population that, by and large, was less affected directly by the virus. And we know that the long-term costs for education, but also for health, for mental health, have percolated through the system, and some of the ruined. And also, second time round, when it came to the later stages of lockdown, and the scientists wanted to do a further one, the politicians have become much more sceptical.
and they'd learned that maybe the scientists were in a bit of a muddle about it, or else they're pushing too much from a particular view. So,
yeah, you mentioned education. I will never forget how often school children were made to mask up, like for hours and hours and hours and hours on end. For what reason? I mean, the science behind mask mandates were questionable, I would say, at best. You mentioned the costs, right?
Very flaky.
You mentioned the costs, right? So depending on what you factor in...
Of the inquiry, 200 million.
No, I was going to say the COVID measures, right? So the cost of the COVID measures, depending on where you look, what you factor in, so 310 billion to 410 billion, right, which equates, let's just drill this down a bit, to £4,600 to £6,100 for every single person in the UK, right? This
every
is a
single
level,
person, yeah.
Apparently, yeah, this is the level of debt we're talking about.
It's a lot of bread.
Why is there such a fascination from people like Rishi Sunak of paying off this debt quickly? I remember him, when he came to power, one of the first things he did is he stood there really proudly saying things like, we're not going to pass this debt on to our grandkids and all the rest of it. Why not? Why wasn't
Well, we will
that
pass
debt?
some of it on, but it's a good idea to get the debt down as much as you can, because the debt payments themselves are enormous. Enormous. They're bigger than some departmental budgets.
And with interest rates going up, it costs governments more to service their debts. I mean, I'm not someone who thinks the government should run a debt-free... It's impossible to run government debt-free, but particularly now that interest rates are higher, it means that government has to find more revenue to, in effect, maintain the same level of services, because more money has to be spent on something that's not a service but is financing the debt.
You mentioned as well, then, in terms of costs of the inquiry. I mean, the costs of this COVID inquiry are eye-watering, as you were just alluding to. Why do you think it is so insanely expensive?
Well, lawyers. 220 quid per hour, some of them are getting. Now, if you can keep that going for a few years, I mean, you're looking at a villa in Sardinia at the end of it, with a yacht called the Lady Hallet. I mean, it's terrific gravy.
But why is that? Because fair enough, people have got commercial rates, I get that, no problem. But where is the kind of negotiation nous in people? Because if you are getting all of these people on a contract for X amount of years or whatever, where is the bargaining power, the negotiation to bring rates down?
Well, the Amalgamated Union of Public Servants and Lawyers has really stiffed us on this one. And it's the number of lawyers. I mean, there's about 100 of them involved in this. You go into the inquiry room, it's like NASA headquarters. They're all looking at these control room, you know, all got computers, and there's masses of ranks of them all there. Quite unnecessary numbers.
It is. Briefly, with you, Richard.
Yeah, I think that also the terms of these inquiries need to be tightened up and need to be thought about more carefully. I mean, thinking about the politics of this, governments want to show the public that they're taking accountability, and so they want to show that they're doing the full blue ribbon inquiry with no limits and so on. But actually, in terms of what that might deliver for the taxpayer, particularly in a tight political situation, it might not actually deliver very much at all.
Well, are you reassured by this inquiry? I started the show with a viewer's response saying absolutely not. What about you guys at home? Tell me what you're making to the inquiry so far.